Code Software.
Everywhere where we work calls you Tim, and they call me TJ. And I was like, that's kind of unfair, that you get to claim the name. And then I stopped and was like, my initials are better.
Now you understand.
My initials are much better. And I was like, okay.
Well, he could be TJ and I would be, TP. And she said, well, you'll be very popular during the coronavirus. Hi, welcome to the first episode of the To Code Software podcast. My name's Tim Purdum. In a minute, you'll meet Tim Jay. We're excited to have you along for the ride on this new podcast, just a laid-back developer podcast with lots of different topics. If you enjoy this episode, please leave us a review on your favorite podcasting source and visit tocode.software.
I like telling stories. My software company is called MTGO Software Solutions. MTGO is Magic the Gathering Online Software Solutions. Mm-hmm. We were sitting there trying to figure out the name of our company for like 3 months, and my ex-business partner just came up with it one day. And we're like, fine, this is fine, right? Because like we weren't sure how many different things we were going to do for MTGO, so Software Solutions. And then like 2 days after we registered the business name, we had realized that it was very close to Mt. Gox. Do you remember that Bitcoin scammer, Mt. Gox,
No.
MTGOX? Yeah, it used to be Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. It actually started originally as a way of transferring Magic cards online. And then that didn't work out, so they already had the MTGOX name, and they renamed it to Mt. Gox, and then became a huge Bitcoin thing, and then they ended up scamming people out of, I don't remember how much money. It was a staggering amount of money and all that. So yeah, and we're MTGOSS. And then people were calling us Mount Goss, which was awkward and terrible. But so we're making our first real software product, and it's the bot software that we're doing. And we're trying to figure out what we want to call it. And it's like, well, MTGO bot is really generic and stuff. And nobody really has a name for their bot online. But I was like, it has to be called JBot. And he's like, why? And I'm like, because I wrote it. And that's my last name, of course, Jay. So I'm sitting here like, this is what I want to call it. And he's like, I don't know about that. I'm like, no, seriously, we have to call it that. Like I put my foot down and he just didn't get why I wanted to put my name on it.
Right.
And so, yeah, that was a very long series of arguments. And it is now called JBot because I won those arguments.
Which is good since you now own the whole company anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but yes, naming things is difficult.
We should start with like some official introductions, just so that it's on the podcast and people know what our names are. So I'll start. My name is Tim Purdum, and I've been a developer for 5-ish years. We'll get into that a little bit later, but I live in Iowa, and I'm a remote developer. And so I guess I'm TP.
We'll just call you Tim. That one's fine.
Okay.
And I'm Tim Jay, and I have been a developer for 9 to 10 years, give or take. And I live in Oregon, and I am also a remote developer, and we work together.
Right. And we're just going to share some ideas. We love to talk every day at work, and we always have good arguments and discussions. So we thought we would share some of those, but we thought first it would be good to let our listeners get to know us, and also for us to even get to know each other better, because we've been working about 6 months together.
Yeah, just about 6 months.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you want to go on with your story that you were telling about MTGOS? S.
Yes,
right.
Yes, MTGOSS, which the whole SS thing, it was a very interesting experience starting a software company, because it started off very ad hoc. It was just 2 guys working together, verbal contracts, PayPaling each other money, that sort of thing. And it was all just one-off projects. And then all of a sudden we were making real money, like kind of this sort of money where you're like, oh, wow, this could be a job. Like this isn't, $100 a month or anything. And so we're like, well, okay, we really need to form an actual company and all that. And my ex-business partner, he took care of all of that side of thing. That was his forte. He went to school for business, so he set it up LLC, and he figured out how S corp status to do some stuff and all that. But I remember signing the contract. I was living in Japan at the time, and I had to like digi sign it and then have my wife bring it to work and fax it to him and all of that to set it up. But it was intimidating to suddenly like have a job where I'm earning money from something that I'm creating so directly.
So was that like your first programming job, or were you already programming before that?
So I could argue the first programming I ever did in my entire life was something called Quake C. If you remember the original Quake video game, I always played shooters. I was that kid who played Doom and Doom 2 and all of those. Yep. So when Quake came out, it came out with its own compiler, and it had its own language called Quake C. It was a derivative of C, very limited in scope, but you could mod the game with it. And that's where like the original Team Fortress came from, and like the Capture the Flag mods and all of that sort of thing came from Quake, and these are mods people did in Quake C. And there happened to be a ton of tutorials out there. And I was a young kid with a computer. You could just open it in Notepad, do a bunch of coding and follow a tutorial and learn how to change the enemy AI or do that sort of stuff. And I did a lot of that, and it was always something I was deeply, deeply fascinated with. And then I didn't really do much else with it until college. And in college, I went to school for networking, which I'm glad I'm not doing. And I took there was Intro to Programming, which at the time was Q Basic. If you remember that thing, that was fun. And then I took C++ and I took VB, which was VB6 at the time, as my programming electives. And they were fun and fine. But for whatever reason, VB stuck with me. And I would write fun applications, like I would write dice rollers to calculate the probabilities of Warhammer 40K because I'm that guy. And I would just do that little stuff. But I found myself working at a lumber treatment company. I've had a lot of really bizarre jobs. And I noticed that they were doing everything by hand, like these huge spreadsheets where they would have to punch in like how many gallons of solution and what percentage of this it was here. And they'd get a calculator out and just be doing math. And I watched the guy do it for like an hour, just sitting there filling this sheet out using a calculator. And I looked at that and said, I learned how to do that in college. I learned how to make a little tiny database application in VB.
Right.
So I went up to the boss and I'm like, I think I can develop this for you. I will do it, give me 1 day a week to work on this while I'm doing everything else. And let me see if I can impress you. Well, 2 years later, I was their entire IT department. And my application I developed there ran every single machine. It tracked downtimes. It tracked how employees were doing their jobs. It did to like 4 decimal places of accuracy on all their chemicals. It saved the company an insane amount of money. But I basically was flying the seat of my pants the entire time. Like I had to teach myself SQL because there was a SQL database I needed to interact with. I was working with VB, so I'm like, well, I have to teach myself how to do UI. I have to teach myself object-oriented programming, and that was trial by fire.
So you were really, you like talked yourself into that first job.
Yep.
Or into that switch of careers, really.
Yeah.
And then had only a couple college classes to fall back on.
I had a stack of programming books at my desk there, and I would just do everything that I could. And then I ended up being unemployed for quite a bit, and then found myself working for a software company. I was originally on the phones. They hired me to do, basically, there was this program that we did that involved accessing veterinary doctors' computers, pulling data from all of their pets, and then processing that and doing stuff with it. And I was hired because I convinced them that I could talk people through things on the phone, which surprisingly I'm fairly good at. There was a lab there, and the lab was this room where all the data came in and it was processed. And there was like 15 different types of veterinary software out there, apparently, and they all have their own database structure and they all have their own way of storing the data. In the lab, we restored that data and then sent it off for other processing. And I worked in the lab as the other half of my job. Well, I realized one day, 8 months in, that my entire job could be automated. That everything that I was doing, this double checking it and figuring out where these files were located, were things I could teach a computer to do, just iterating through a file system, do this and that. So I wrote a program to do my job. In VB at the time, mind you, because I hadn't really done much. At that time, I was on VB.net, but it was really early VB.net. their IT department at that place were these 3 guys, wonderful, great guys. They were all coders, and they looked at my program. It was part of the thing, like, we need to make sure that your program's not like deleting something or Bitcoin mining. I guess that wasn't a thing then. And they looked through it and they're like, this is really great and wonderful. You should really look into C#. It's a great language. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. And that wormed its way in the back of my head. And then I left. And then when I was in Japan, I had been there about 2 months, and then I got bored. Mm-hmm. And then I can resume my story, but I got to hear more about your time, because I know less about your history.
That's true, because I interviewed you for our current companies. So I got to hear a lot of this the first time around. So I was a music teacher for 18 years. I taught all different levels. We actually lived just outside of Boston when we graduated college. My wife and I moved out there, or fiance at the time, I guess. Then we moved out here to Iowa for her job. And so I found a different school district, stayed there for 2 years, found a better school district that I liked the position more, stayed there for 6 years, and then was let go because of budget cuts. And I landed on my feet, though. The next fall, I had a job at a lab school at our local state university. And I was there for 2 years, and the lab school closed. So I lost my job again the second time in 2 years. And like, the budget cuts had been going on a while at my previous job. So it was like a 4-year span where I didn't know if I would have a job the next year, which was really stressful. So I did land yet another public school job after that, which I was at for the last 5 years of my career. And I enjoyed that school very much. I got to do just elementary again, which I really like teaching little kids. I learned a lot about myself, because I'm definitely very introverted, which is strange for a teacher. So that would cause me to actually, like, in a bad situation with a upset kid, I could lose my temper too. So, I learned that about myself. And between that and losing jobs repeatedly, I kind of started seeing that I'm not going to make it to retirement in this career. I need to do something different. So actually, quite a bit before that, I got invited to train other music teachers in a summer course. And so I got to work with other adults too, which was nice. So I decided to write some books. As I was teaching these courses, people would say, okay, well, this stuff that you're teaching us is great, but how do I do all this organization of my lesson plans? And so that became my thing, was I was going to write a book about organizing lesson plans for music teachers. And so I wrote some books about that, and I started doing websites so that I could, like, sell the books. And I started out with WordPress because, it was so easy to get started. You really had to know zero code. You could buy a hosted WordPress thing, and then it was all GUI led, and I could just click and add, pages and images and themes and stuff. Well, eventually I wanted it to do more things, and I've always been, like, experimenting with computers. I had a basic class, like basic when I was a kid. So like pre-QBasic, pre-Visual Basic. And I definitely had lots of, like, tinkering type experiences. I have the WordPress site. I have this lesson planning book. I decided I needed 2 things. I needed a lesson plan that was digital and that saved people time. And I also needed, like, a calendar. And I'll tell you why in a minute, why you need a calendar. But these were kind of my 2 things that I'm still supporting a version of now, that kicked off my real interest in programming. So for the lesson planner, I started with a Google spreadsheet, which, if you've never used it, it's very similar to Excel, except it's all, in the cloud. But you know how you can do data validation in Excel? Yeah. Where you, like, so you say, okay, I'm going to, on this hidden page, I'm going to put a list of 5 different things, and then I'm going to say that range there is the data that's available, and then it creates, like, a drop down for you. So similar to the forms that we still create for our company today. Yeah. But I was just doing it all in Google spreadsheet because I didn't know how to do it otherwise. But then the other part well, like I said, there was a calendar, but I guess there was a third thing that really made me dig in on WordPress was I wanted a searchable database of songs. Like, so a teacher could search and say, I want to teach this concept. What songs should I use? So there's a music notation software called Noteflight that's online. And I figured out that I could embed my scores from their website into my WordPress site with some custom JavaScript. And I could also take a spreadsheet, like the lesson plan I was saying, or just my list of songs, and I could embed that with like a Google API. And Google back then had like a little like playground window on their API page where you could just test things out. Like you could type in things and see what happened. And so you could hook like a Google spreadsheet up to show up on a page as a spreadsheet. And so I had to make that, and then I made it clickable so you could go through to the page with the music score on it and with other details. And yeah, I had to learn both JavaScript a little bit and PHP a little bit because that's the server side for WordPress, just to get things to like render and understand the difference. Like,
if those are your first two big languages, how did you ever continue on? Like, come on.
Well, you know, when you don't know any better, they don't seem that bad. Yeah.
So I moved to Japan with my wife, and she was going to teach English there, and I was bored. And when I get bored, I go stir crazy. I have to find something to do. So I was like watching TV series. I was just like, I'm going to watch all of Lost. And I just sat and watched all of it, just like the entire thing in like 2 weeks sort of thing. So I watched a bunch of TV, and I was like, I need to find something to do. But I was just on Twitter because I know a lot of people on Twitter, a lot of people just involved in various different communities. And at that time, I'd been playing Magic the Gathering, the card game, since basically beta, like circa 93, 94. So I had a big collection. I was very involved in it. And I also played Magic the Gathering online, which was the third version of the program for anybody who knows anything about it. So I followed a bunch of Magic pros and other people Magic related on Twitter. And one day, there was a person who retweeted a man who would then become my business partner in a little while, who was like, I need somebody who can take a bunch of data and show me a report on it. He had a bunch of data. He needed somebody to show him a report, some graphs, answer questions about it. Well, something that I had learned at my lumber job is something called Crystal Reports. It's a very, I think it's an excellent reporting software, but you can hook it up to any database that's ever existed ever and do staggeringly awesome things with it. And I'd gotten very good at using it. So I was like, well, if this guy's got a database, I can hook up Crystal Reports. I can do this for him. So I did it. He had a bunch of data from something that was, I don't even remember the name of it. It was a different botting software at the time that my business partner to be was using. And all it was just dumping like transactional data, but it had no way of showing him anything. And so I imported it and gave him some reports. And he was like, wow, that's really cool. He's like, well, what else can you do with computers? I'm like, I have unlimited free time, anything. He's like, oh, okay, well, I need to get my competitors' prices. So can you do this thing to get their prices? I was like, yes, I can. And I was lying through my teeth because I had no idea what I was doing, but I had too much free time. So at the time I had remembered that little worm was in my head, and it was C# is a better language. And I did a little bit of Googling, and it's like, don't use bb.net. Just move, everything is moving to C#. So like, all right, sure. I'm going to teach myself C# and work for this guy. And so I built him a thing, and it worked. I have no idea how it worked. I've looked at that code. I will never show another living soul. But it worked. And he's like, this is really cool. What else can you do? I'm like, anything. He's like, can you build a bot? I said, yes, of course I can. And I did. I literally was like, I need to teach myself C#. So I did.
Were there tutorials for the bots, though?
Nothing.
Like for interacting with
nothing.
Magic
There's no official API or anything. The version 3 of the bot was being rendered through some weird thing. You could get a window handle to it, but I didn't want to do it with injection or anything that insane because that was way beyond my abilities. But one thing that is the window was consistent. If you resize that window to a specific size, different buttons were always in the same spot. And different text was always in the same spot because it was this really old, like it looked like early 90s level computer technology. So I wrote a way to move the mouse around using Windows P invoke calls and click on things and takes really, really, really fast screenshots, and being able to dig through screenshots to do OCR on the characters, because every letter only appeared in one of two variations, depending on if it was an even or an odd offset on the x-axis. Like, it's that weird, right? And
Right.
I built an entire OCR system. I built a way to move the mouse around and all that. And it basically, you would set up a virtual machine, you would run a copy of MTGO, you'd run a copy of the bot, and it would just interact with the client and buy and sell cards. At the time, you had to drop text files on there to teach it like what prices you wanted, and it spat out data, and it crashed constantly, but I wrote it. And it was my first major software product on my own, teaching myself C#, was a better bot, my alpha version, than what he was using before.
Right.
So he's like, I'm moving all my business onto your bots. I'm like, what? Okay. And he moved his business over. And then the other guy using that software, who was bigger, was like, what do you got over there? I'm moving over as well. And then that other bot software folded, because that was his only two clients, basically were mine. And then I had to just do it. Like, every day was like, oh, I need to learn SQL because I need to start storing data that everybody can see. So I taught myself SQL, taught myself how to do all that stuff, set up Amazon RDS databases, and I had to teach myself everything to run the business. And then the next version of the software was coming out for MTGO, and I had to teach myself a completely different framework on automation and more invoke calls and like these really ultra efficient ways of doing things. I needed to work with the database. So I wanted an ORM, and I wrote everything in Entity Framework, and this is really early Entity Framework, like 1.0, and it was awful and slow, and every call to the database took too long because bot software is competitive. A millisecond can make a serious difference, which is annoying, but I had to get more bare metal, and I tore it all out, and I redid everything in Hibernate, and it was a little bit faster, but it was still terrible. I tore it all out, and I redid the entire thing. I did it all by hand with just ADO.NET and everything at the time, because I needed it fast.
Right.
And so I had gotten it to that stage, and then I had to redo everything. And that time I did it right. I used Postgres, and I used a thing called NPOCO, and I picked all of my technologies, and I wrote this grand thing. And I actually got to do an alpha version of the bot for somebody who contracted us to run their bots for them. And it was this glorious thing. And then all of a sudden, this was like a full-time job that was paying more than my wife was making as a teacher in Japan. And it's like, the entire time, I was the only coder, the only developer. My business partner barely knew anything about programming.
Right.
And so I just carried that monolith. And then we moved back to America after 3 years because we missed home. And that was it. I was supporting two people comfortably all of the sudden with this thing that I had created.
Yeah.
We ended up out in Eugene, Oregon, which is a very interesting place. And then MTGO's economy decided to die because MTG Arena got announced, which is a newer, better version of the software that nobody's collections will move across. So it doesn't have trading, and thus my bots have a shelf life now.
Right.
And that's when I started looking for work, and well, then I got interviewed by you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, that's an amazing story, really. I mean, all the pieces where you just took on the programming before you were a programmer and, at the other jobs, and then this guy just asking you, what can you do? Oh, I can do that. And then doing it better than anyone else. Don't try this at home, kids.
Yeah. No, it's been a bit scary being the sole breadwinner, and technically self-employed was really scary. Concerns about insurance, concerns about all this other stuff. And I'm still running the business. It's still earning a profit, and it's still running, and it will likely be doing so for several years at this point. It's just doesn't take a lot of my time. It's just a thing that runs. But I still like doing that, but it is nice to work for a place that I'm not the only one making every decision, because I did end up buying out the entire company a few years ago. And so I was the only person making decisions. And while that is really nice, there's just intense amounts of pressure because it was my livelihood. So,
well, and I know that's something I definitely want to talk about. I don't think we're going to get to it today, but working on a team with other people. And so I guess I should finish my story then.
Yeah.
Because I did have kind of an entrepreneurial phase in my story too. So I knew that I needed to leave teaching, as I said. And after working on the websites and the publishing and things, I decided that I wanted an app version. This was 2015. And I had seen PHP, I had seen JavaScript, so I knew, and those are both like C sharp. They're in the C language or C family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they look similar. You can see how things look. Well, I had looked at Objective C for iOS, and have you ever seen Objective C, Tim?
Yes.
It is scary looking because it has some other besides C. It has another. I think Smalltalk is its predecessor that it comes from. So it's got all these weird like brackets, like straight brackets that I could not understand at all. And it just looked confusing to me, having some familiarity with JavaScript and PHP. But I happened to be looking in 2015, and that's when Swift came out. And Swift is a nice, clean, modern language. It's actually cleaner than C sharp in some senses, and like they do away with the semicolons and things like that. So that was really my first dig in. I was like, I'm going to program an app. So I bought a book on how to program an app, and I followed the book through. And once I got far enough through the book to say, okay, here's an app, then I started saying, okay, now I want it to be a lesson planner like the one I had. And so I made drop-down menus, and I had to learn with WordPress, they use MySQL. So I was doing a little custom SQL when I was customizing that. And so I think I just stayed with MySQL, but I had to teach myself a lot more. And I think what I ended up doing was I had a PHP server, like probably the same server that was running WordPress for me, was the back end for this app, right? So that it would just take these little calls and store stuff in a database for teachers so that they could, log in and get it from another device or whatever. So I did that. And I also wanted to make a calendar, and there's a million calendar apps. So why in the heck would somebody build a calendar? But an elementary music teacher teaches very often, and not even just music teachers, lots of teachers teach on rotations that are not days of the week. So it could be a 2-day rotation, an A-B day, so week 1, you have A, B, A, B, A, right? And then week 2 starts on B, which means if you try to use Google Calendar and you say, I want this to repeat every Monday. No, that's not what I want. You see what I'm saying? Like you can't use the repeat function at all for something like that. And my schedules were 3 days, or every 3 days I'd see a class in one district, and then at another district it was every 4 days I would see a class. And if you had not a sick day, if you had a snow day, it would move the whole calendar after that. Like so you had to actually be able to program and click and say, whoops, this was a snow day, shift everything down. And so that's what my app would do. Like you could create a class that was on this rotation. You would tell it, here's the start of the school semester or school year. Here's the end of it. I see the kids every 3 days. Here's the holidays to skip. And then you could also add snow days and skip those.
Well, that's super cool.
Yeah. So I did all of that in Swift, the calendar and the lesson planner. And then I decided, okay, well, I got to hit Android too, right? So now I got to learn Java. And so my second programming task was my app. I ported it from Swift to Java and from iOS to Android. And, I did sell them both in the app stores. And from a financial point of view, learning Java and Android was a complete waste of time. I think I sold 2 Android copies of that app. And I did realize like the ridiculousness of that, right? That I'm taking it and I'm completely rewriting it. And that's when I started looking for solutions to that problem. And where do you think that led me?
Xamarin?
Yep, exactly. So I said, well, this is ridiculous. If I'm ever going to write another app, which I enjoyed the process of writing an app, but I don't want to write it twice for every app I'm going to write. So, there were other solutions, but not nearly as many as there are now. I think I looked a little bit. There was like, what was it called? Phone Gap or something? I can't. It's Cordova. I don't know. I may be making things up. But they were like JavaScript based. And I was like, I don't know if I want to go back to JavaScript. I have my feelings about JavaScript. I like strongly typed languages a lot.
Yes.
And so when I saw that C# and I was like, it looks identical to Java. Like the two languages, if you're not careful, like if you don't see the extension on the file that you're looking at, you could easily get confused as to whether you were looking at Java or C#. They're very close cousins as far as syntax goes. And so having just done Java, that was an easy jump. So this was when I was ready to leave teaching, and I made a plan that I was going to take all of this, and this after I had experimented with Xamarin for a while. I also realized that timing wise, I came out exactly perfect again because it was right when .NET Core came out. So I learned ASP.NET Core MVC, and I said, okay, I'm going to build my whole business around selling to other music teachers services. So I was going to change it to a service model where the kids can go on, they can do activities, they can do exercises, they can take tests. And the reason I thought this would catch on is because there's a lot of states that have like mandated testing even for music teachers, but they don't tell the teachers what it is. Like they don't tell them how to do a test, just say you have to do a test and report it. And so a lot of teachers are looking for a process like that. What I didn't count on is a lot of teachers have no money and no budget. I started this website and I went to conventions and demonstrated it for teachers. And I wrote lots of blog posts and, tried to give away like free teaser things so that some of the web page is always free. It's called unison.school if anyone wants to look at it. It's still up. And right now I made the whole thing free because once I got another job, it was more work dealing with the credit card processing than it was worth. Like my time was worth more than keeping that functional. So I decided to just make the whole website free because I wasn't making any money at it anyways. I definitely don't have a sales mind at all.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you took 3 classes in college, but then you had to kind of teach yourself a lot later on. And of course, I didn't have any computer science classes in college, but I did mention the books. Specifically, the first 2 books I had were, I think the company's called SAMS, SAMS. They all say 24 hours on them. You would probably recognize it, and I can put a link on the website to it. But it was like, teach yourself Swift in 24 hours. And then the other one was like, teach yourself Android development in 24 hours. And so those were the first 2 books that I worked with. And then I really got into podcasting, of course. And from podcasts, I learned about the Clean Coder books. Which, have you read those?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you should read them. They are awesome. Bob Martin, I think, is the author's name. And, he goes way back when you and I were still itty bitty. But Clean Code, all the examples are in Java, but like I said, it's not that hard to convert them over in your head. And just the whole Solid, right? I don't think he lists out Solid, but he's got it all there. And so like all the don't repeat yourself stuff and all the single responsibility, this should have one responsibility, and the inversion of control and how one thing relates to another. I learned all of that from his books, and I was like, oh, wow. And so that kind of, before I started my website, I had a fairly decent idea of what an architecture should look like. Because I didn't just try it with the apps. It was literally like they're called View Controller on iOS, and so it's like the code behind, right? And everything was in there. you would die. I'll have to dig up one of my old files and show you, because it was like everything in one class.
The code I wrote for that lumber company that like ran everything, it was WinForms, and all of the logic was in the events. Like you click a button and it would
Uh-huh.
do everything right there. And it was,
Right.
oh, it was so bad. Just,
Yeah. So you understand. That's like that's the easy trap to fall into
hmm
because, when you're starting to program, that's all you've got is that one
hmm
class. And you're like, oh, well, I guess I should just put the code right here.
It was a lot of Stack Overflow for me was where I learned a lot. But
Uh-huh.
the first bot I wrote was terrible. It was just stuff thrown together, a lot of static classes, just a lot of like making it work. When I redid the whole thing, I read everything on domain-driven design. Everything. I just consumed. And then I actually sat my business partner down and I was like, we're going to develop a domain language. And we have it. I've got the entire thing written down. We went through like almost a month of just talking every day about our ideas on things, what it needs to do, what it doesn't need to do. And it was really like the kind of the foundation of the way that the whole thing ended up. Everything we discussed ended up getting implemented in one way or another. And so it was really quick for me to code things because it wasn't this kind of like stop, wait for somebody else to give me an answer because we'd already discussed that. And as a sole coder, I could just do it. So in a way, it was nice because I had the freedom to kind of be like, I'm going to do whatever with an ORM. I could implement something and tear it out, implement something and tear it out. But that was kind of the way I learned to code was I read some books on coding, but it was only way after the fact. A lot of it was like, I'm going to consume this library. I'm going to learn how it works. I would go on and check out the source code. I would like dig into it. And, I've written my own ORM. I wrote my own like DI container and stuff, just not because it's good or I'm ever actually going to use it, but more of a like, I want to learn how to do this. I wrote my own CSV parser that ended up being better than all of the CSV parsers that exist out there. And I use it for my program. And it was just, I need to learn how to do this. I'm going to learn how others have done it. And so I'm like one of those guys who, because all of my stuff was generally like Microsoft coding standards, that's the way my coding style got developed, underscores on your fields. And I'm very, very strict about that because everything that I consumed was kind of stuff that was out there to be learned from, GitHub repos and such. Yeah. So that's kind of where that all came from. But books and stuff, I don't really recall reading any until after I'd already kind of gotten into it.
Yeah, that's that's so interesting because I don't know many other people that can learn the way you do with just like studying the code itself. But obviously we all do that to some extent in our jobs, because we have to look at everyone else's code. But I definitely the first couple times I looked at GitHub and like tried to look at a project, I was like, what? I don't understand what this is. Like, where's the code? Where's program.main?
I would just download the zip. I'd just download the whole zip of the whole repo and I'd load it up in Visual Studio and I would just dig. I would just dig through the whole thing and be able to use IntelliSense and, all of that. It's the way I kind of did it. But I just got really into like esoteric subjects though. Like there's really common stuff that everybody else is familiar with that I'm not great with because it just never happened to come up. But then like I know a stupid amount about how like bitmaps are stored in Windows and how you can like p-invoke that and you can get pointers to bitmaps and dig pixels out of there and do weird transformations. Like I know how to do all of that because it was something that was really important. Or like, hey, I need to learn to write ILs because I need to use reflection like really aggressively for really stupid reasons that I probably could have solved in another way. But so I know a lot about that, but then like I didn't use a lot of LINQ. I didn't really learn a lot about it. So there's just for loops everywhere. I don't really use for each very much because at a certain point, I don't know, I got obsessed with doing everything as efficiently as possible. And I fall down into that trap way too often now.
Yeah, I remember you talking about what a strange transition it was to go from the bot world where efficiency mattered to the more forms on screen world that, it's like nobody's going to notice that, that microsecond that you just optimized. And it can, in general, I think it's definitely good to understand optimization as long as it doesn't make the code harder to read or anything. But,
I'm currently rewriting my entire reflection library and it's all handwritten IL. And I look at it, I'm like, I should probably comment this really well because I'm going to forget what this is doing.
Well, you're not doing that for the company, right? So you could just,
Nope.
well, unless you put it on GitHub or something, give it away.
Well, that's the goal. The goal is I have
Yeah.
a GitHub repo, not going to reveal it yet. It's not there yet, but I'm going to finish my reflection library and it's going to be very standalone and it's going to have a lot of very useful features. And I'm hopefully going to target .NET Standard, although right now I'm just in .NET Core because it's vastly superior. I'm really hoping that maybe once it's done and it's perfect, I can go to our mutual boss of sorts and be like, hey, remember how I keep talking about reflection? I happen to know this really great library that's open source.
Right.
And just kind of like, here, look through all the code. It's my own style, but it works. Here's all the unit tests. And I've been working on it for a while. It's not in a great stage, but
Yeah. Well, and I do have a GitHub. I think I was in the job market longer than you were probably,
oh yeah.
or had more urgency to it because I did not have any income coming in as an entrepreneur. And so I did a bunch of things like LinkedIn and the GitHub and, trying to put projects up there. And so I would like take out a specific piece of unison.school and put that piece on GitHub for free so that somebody could see my work, but I'm not giving away my entire, business code. And so, yeah, it's fun to do that. Should we do this hotspot and give a favorite tip or tool?
Shout outs to a plugin called Fodi. If you haven't heard of Fodi, it is amazing.
Wait, spell that.
Fody. Okay.
Fody.
All right. By itself, it basically does nothing. But what it is it basically inserts itself during the build process to do some stuff. Okay. That's all it does. And it's really simple to just, you install it. There's a file you can create to tell it about submodules, but that's the gold of it, the submodules. There's one called configure await. And you can put it in there and you can put a little file in there that says yes or no, so false generally. And everywhere in your code, every task, every time that you're using anything async, if you have not specifically said .configure await true or false, it will just add it. So you don't have to manually add it everywhere in your entire code, like, you shouldn't have to, but you do. And there's a ton of plugins. You can do one where you can just make any class iNotify property changed, and it will automatically during the compile process make all of those properties support it completely. Just for you. You don't have to write a single bit of code. And there's dozens and dozens of these plugins, and most people don't really know about them, but they're all out there. You can write your own plugins. There's one I use where you can write IL code just using that, and it will compile it straight into IL for you. Like, there's just a million plugins, and they're really great, and they can save a ton of time. Really easy to integrate.
I wonder if that would be good, though, because what happens when you have that code then and you're relying on Fodi every time you compile and then somebody deletes Fodi?
Well,
I mean, like, then your code doesn't work, right? Or, I mean, I guess that's true of anything, but
yeah. I mean, it is a dependency and all of that. But the nice thing is like once it's compiled, the compiled exe does have all of that code and everything. So it's not another DLL that you have to have in there. It's not another like big dependency since it's in the build process. Once you distribute the exe, it's the kind of fixed good version. And so it's a bit nicer than just, importing a bunch of third-party libraries to do all of that.
I don't know though. It's still something about the idea bothers me. Like I think I want to see the code containing all of, what I expect it to contain. There's that whole line between magic and, like what you understand and what you don't understand. And I know that you understand a lot more than I do because you can read IL and all of that. But I don't know. That's interesting. I'm not saying I would never use it.
I'll have to show you some examples sometime. It's really great. I recommend, take a look at it. You might find a use for it. You might not. I use it in basically all of my personal projects. It just simplifies a lot of stuff.
So I guess my hotspot tip or tool is much more general, but I'm just really excited about .NET 5. And, the idea that we're not going to have to keep track of, is this project .NET Standard, and is this project .NET Core, and is this one .NET Framework, and it's all going to be the same thing. And then all you have to do is tell the executable what you're targeting. And they even said there was going to be multi-targeted executables. Like, I don't even understand how that works, but I swear I saw something that said multi-executable targets, like basically a Xamarin app that can do from a single executable project. It can then do the different like iOS and Windows and Android. And then they were talking about Blazor, of course, is the new, web forms UI, but they said you could get a target where it would then create like a mobile app out of Blazor, kind of like React Native, that kind of thing, where it's just taking the web code and then converting it over into, I don't know.
That is super cool.
But it's definitely feeding that what I mentioned earlier about Xamarin, about like the one code base to do everything, which has always been an appealing thing for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, as soon as I get the alphas or the betas out for 5, I'm going to be moving everything I make to it, because I'm okay with using that for kind of my own personal stuff. And it'll be the goal to just kind of roll all my stuff along with that and then drag everything forward. So then it's going to be way easier, because I've still got a lot of code written in, like Net 461 was the last big net update I did for some of the components of my project. So I should update them, but then I don't want to break it.
Yeah. Well, that's always a problem too. But Net 5 Preview 1 is out now.
Is it?
Yeah, March 16th. Here, I can send you the link for it, and we should put links for all of these things that we talk about when I post the episode. But yeah, that came out last month, and I haven't tried it yet, but just that link describes some of the things I was mentioning.
Very nice.
About unified projects, and I don't know, it's a brave new world, but
I wonder if Writer will handle this.
They'll have to. I mean, that's.
Well, I mean, right now though.
Oh yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. It may take them a while to handle it, but you can get on a Writer developer build too.
I should check those.
So that you can get ahead with that. That would probably help. Yeah.
Now I'm all interested in digging into all of that. So I'm going to get sidetracked here.
Well, before you get sidetracked, I think we should probably wrap it up. And how would people get in touch with you if they wanted to say hi or?
Oh man, my Twitter is read only at this point. Facebook is read only at this point. I really should delete it.
All right.
I basically don't exist very much yet, so I will have to find a way to make a social media presence.
Yeah. It seems like the thing to do for podcasters and developers is Twitter. And I haven't used mine in years either, but mine is just at Tim Purdum, Purdum. And also, I'm probably going to post this all at twocode.software. So that's it. We survived episode 1.
I'm not sure if our listeners will.
We'll find out. All right. Thanks a lot, Tim.
Yep.